The giant sucking sound.
Oh, man.
I just want you to let those words sit in the air for a second. It is visceral. It's weird. And honestly, if you didn't know the context, it sounds like, I don't know, a catastrophic plumbing emergency.
Right. Or maybe the title of a B-grade sci-fi horror movie from the 80s. It really does.
Yeah.
But it's one of those phrases that if you were around in the early 90s, it instantly triggers a very specific memory. You probably picture this charts and graphs billionaire on TV with a laser pointer.
Yep.
But if you're younger or, if you just weren't following American politics back then, it might sound like complete nonsense.
Exactly. But here is the thing, and this is why we're talking about it today. This isn't just a funny arrangement of words. This specific sound actually defined an entire era of American economic anxiety.
You really did.
It was the viral meme of 1992 before the concept of a meme even existed.
It was the soundbite that ate the election. And in many ways, it was kind of the first time a mass audience was forced to visualize globalization not as like a handshake, but as a physical force.
Right. So today we are doing a deep dive into the source material surrounding this exact phrase. It starts with Ross Perot and the 1992 presidential election.
Specifically, the brawl over NAFTA.
Yes, the North American Free Trade Agreement. But our mission for this deep dive isn't just a dry history lesson about a trade deal.
Thankfully.
We're going to look at how this catchphrase actually escaped the orbit of American politics and traveled around the world. We've got historical sources, media archives, and global economic reports to pull from.
It's a fascinating case study in how language evolves. We're going to trace it from a warning about Mexico to a description of the European Union, and eventually into a very graphic and very strange description of politicians panicking in Washington, D.C.
And along the way, we're going to pull out some key insights from all these sources about globalization, labor arbitrage, and really the physics of fear. So grab your headphones, maybe check your plumbing just in case, because we are diving deep into the giant sucking sound.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's set the scene. It is 1992. The U.S. presidential campaign is in full swing. You have the incumbent, George H.W. Bush. You have the challenger, Bill Clinton.
Hey there.
And then you have the grenade in the room.
Ross Perot.
The independent candidate. And it's really important to remember, for those who weren't watching back then, Perot wasn't a polished politician.
Not at all.
He was a Texas billionaire businessman. He literally bought 30-minute infomercials on primetime TV just to show people charts about the national debt.
Can you imagine that today? 30 minutes of charts. No viral dances, just bar graphs on network television.
And people watched. They really tuned in. He brought a totally different energy to the stage. He was blunt, he was folksy, and he was completely obsessed with the nitty-gritty details of the economy.
He wasn't speaking in soaring political rhetoric. He was speaking in business logic. He treated the U.S. economy like a distressed asset that he was trying to fix.
And the specific moment we're dissecting from our sources is the second presidential debate, October 19th, 1992. The topic on the table is NAFTA.
Right.
Now, Perot was famously against it, but he didn't just say, I think this is suboptimal macroeconomic policy. He painted a picture.
He had to. He needed a metaphor that would cut through all the academic talk. And to understand the metaphor, we have to look at the specific economic argument he was making on that stage.
Right. He wasn't just throwing insults out there.
No, he was talking about a concept economists call factor price equalization.
Okay, hold on. Factor price equalization. That sounds exactly like the textbook definition that puts people to sleep.
Fair enough.
Let's break that down for the listener based on the debate transcript. What was he actually pointing at?
Essentially, he was looking at the massive disparity between the cost of labor in the United States and the cost of labor in Mexico. He was arguing that when you remove trade barriers between two economies with such vastly different wage structures, the free market will force them to meet in the middle.
Right.
It's like connecting two water tanks. One full, one empty, and you connect them with a pipe. The water levels have to equalize.
So let's unpack the actual numbers he threw out there in the debate, because they were pretty stark. According to the source material, Perot was highlighting that U.S. factory workers at the time were earning somewhere in the range of $12, $13, or $14 an hour.
Correct. And that $12 to $14 an hour, that was the benchmark for a middle-class American life back then. It bought a house, a car, it bought stability.
And then he pointed south.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argued that if you move a factory south of the border to Mexico, you are paying labor $1 an hour.
$12 versus $1.
Yeah.
That is a massive gap. Any CFO looking at a spreadsheet is going to circle that number in red ink.
Oh, absolutely.
But he didn't stop at wages.
Right.
Because it wasn't just about the paycheck.
No, and this is where he really tried to drive the point home for the business-minded voters. It's about the total cost of employment.
The hidden costs.
Right. He listed the lack of benefits in Mexico as huge cost savers for corporations. He mentioned no retirement plans, no environmental controls, and no pollution controls.
And he's specifically mentioned healthcare, too, which was a big deal.
He did. He noted that healthcare is the, quote, most expensive single element in making a car.
Wow.
His argument was that in Mexico, corporations just wouldn't have to carry that burden at all.
So let's look at this from the perspective of a CEO in 1992.
Yeah.
You have cheap labor, no benefits, no environmental regulations. Perot's conclusion was basically, if you are a corporation and your only goal is profit, why would you possibly stay in the U.S.?
Precisely. He was describing a vacuum. He was arguing that capital money, factories, jobs, it flows like water. It flows to the lowest point of resistance and cost.
Yeah.
He was directly challenging the idea that companies had any sort of national loyalty when the math was that clear.
And that leads us to the quote. He said, and I'm paraphrasing the buildup here, but if you have all these factors, there will be a giant sucking sound going south.
There it is. The auditory metaphor for U.S. jobs leaving the country.
It's such a powerful image. He didn't say jobs will migrate. He didn't say employment figures will shift. He said sucking sound.
It implies violence.
Yes.
It implies a force of nature that you just can't stop once you open the door.
It frames the economy not as a system of cooperation, but as a system of predation. The sucking sound is the sound of the U.S. being drained. It's the sound of a hull breach on a spaceship.
It really is. And he had a pretty grim prediction about what would happen next, because it wasn't just that the jobs would leave, it was about what would happen to the wages of the people left behind. This goes back to that equalization concept we talked about.
The water tanks leveling out.
Right. Perot predicted that Mexican wages would eventually rise. He said they might go up from $1 to $6 an hour, which sounds good for Mexico.
Sure.
But, and here's the scary part for the American voter, he argued that U.S. wages would fall to match them.
So everyone meets in the middle at $6 an hour, meaning the American standard of living basically gets cut in half.
Exactly. He claimed this process would, quote, wreck the country. It was a classic argument against unchecked globalization. The idea that it benefits the owners of capital but ultimately hurts the laborers in the developed world.
Right.
He was basically telling the American worker, you cannot compete with $1 an hour without becoming poor yourself.
And we are not endorsing that economic view or the opposing view here, just to be clear to you listening. We are just looking at the argument he made.
Yeah.
And it's a terrifying picture if you are a factory worker in 1992.
Absolutely.
You're hearing this billionaire on stage tell you that your $14 an hour job is mathematically doomed. But, as we know from the history books, history took a slightly different turn.
Well, the election certainly did. Because, despite the memorable line, Perot lost. Bill Clinton won the presidency.
And Clinton supported NAFTA.
He did. The agreement went into effect on January 1st, 1994.
Now, before we move on to how this phrase survived the 90s, I have to share a little piece of trivia from our notes. A little well-actually moment. Because human memory is a funny thing.
Oh, I love these details. What did you find?
So we all remember it as giant sucking sound. It's in the history books. It's on Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the original transcript from the Commission on Presidential Debates and PBS, they transcribed it slightly differently back then. They originally wrote it down as job-sucking sound.
Job-sucking sound, that doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it?
Not at all. Giant-sucking sound feels momentous. It feels cinematic. Job-sucking sound feels, I don't know, a bit clunky, a bit too literal.
It just goes to show how collective memory works. We culturally remembered the version that hit harder. Giant gives it scale. It turns it into a monster.
Right.
Job sucking sounds like a localized HR problem. Giant sucking sound sounds like a national catastrophe.
Exactly. So NAFTA passes, Perot loses, the world moves on. But the phrase didn't disappear. It actually started to travel. This is where the story gets really interesting to me as we look at the later sources.
This is the linguistic evolution part. The phrase detached itself from the specific context of the 1992 U.S.-Mexico debate. And it just became a piece of general slang for economic fear.
It became the go-to term for unwanted labor exportation.
Or even just the fear of it. Anytime one nation felt like they were losing jobs to a rival, especially a rival with lower costs, that sound came up. It stopped being about Ross Perot and started being about the universal feeling of vulnerability.
And it wasn't just Americans using it. The notes mention a European Union representative actually using the phrase on the record.
Yes. This was a specific instance where an EU rep spoke about worrying about, quote, the giant sucking sound from Eastern Europe.
So in that context, Western Europe plays the role of the U.S., the high-wage, high-regulation zone, and Eastern Europe plays the role of Mexico.
Exactly. The dynamic is identical. You have established, higher-wage economies fearing the pull of developing lower-wage economies right next door.
Right.
It shows that the anxiety Perot tapped into wasn't uniquely American. It's a feature of globalized economics. Whenever you have a border separating high wages and low wages, somebody is going to hear that sound.
It's interesting because it suggests that the sound isn't about specific countries. It's about the gradient. It's about the slope.
That's a great way to put it. It's about the slope of the economic playing field.
Speaking of slopes and globalization, here's where it gets highly ironic. There was a great observation from Thomas Friedman in our source material. Now, Friedman is the guy who wrote The World is Flat.
Right.
He's generally known as a big cheerleader for globalization.
He is. He's always looking for those massive global shifts. And years after Perot made his prediction, Friedman looked at the global data and opined that the tables had completely turned.
What did he see?
He noted that Mexicans were now hearing the giant sucking sound themselves.
Wait, so the jobs went to Mexico, and then Mexico started losing them?
Yes. Friedman said they were hearing it in stereo. From China in one ear and India in the other.
That is wild. So the sucking sound kept moving east to Asia.
It illustrates the relentless nature of what economists often call the race to the bottom regarding labor costs. Perot warned that U.S. jobs would go to Mexico because it was cheaper.
Right.
But eventually, China joined the World Trade Organization, India opened up its economy, and suddenly, Mexico wasn't the cheapest option anymore.
So the very thing Perot warned would happen to the U.S., that feeling of helplessness as jobs vanish, happened to the country he was originally afraid of.
Precisely. It really highlights that in a global economy, there is always a South.
Always the South.
There is always somewhere with lower costs, at least until the entire global standard of living levels out.
It's like a really stressful game of musical chairs. But every time the music stops, the chair is in a different country. And the South isn't a compass direction anymore. It's just an economic state of being cheaper than the next guy.
That's a perfect summary. And it validates the underlying mechanism Perot was talking about, capital chasing the lowest cost.
Even if his specific prediction didn't play out exactly.
Right. Even if the U.S. wasn't completely wrecked by Mexico the way he thought, the mechanism was real. The geography just kept shifting.
So the phrase traveled geographically, but it also started to travel contextually. It wasn't just about international trade deals anymore. It started popping up in domestic industries that have nothing to do with manufacturing.
It became a shorthand for any drastic economic downturn. It's like we needed a vocabulary for mass disappearance.
For instance, we have an example from Joe Sharkey, a columnist for the New York Times. This was years later.
Right. And this was in the airline industry. Totally different sector. Sharkey used the headline, "That Giant Sucking Sound," to introduce a serious discussion about a massive slump in employment at major U.S. carriers.
And he wasn't talking about outsourcing pilots to Mexico.
No, not at all. He was
Right.
talking about a 34% slump in employment over a 4-year period.
Wow.
He was talking about bankruptcy, consolidation, and layoffs just due to brutal market conditions.
So in this case, the sucking sound wasn't jobs going to another country. It was just jobs vanishing into thin air because of an industry collapse.
Exactly. The metaphor shifted from displacement to just disappearance. It signifies a vacuum where prosperity used to be. It's the sound of the air leaving the room. It shows how versatile the phrase became.
Yeah.
It basically just meant bad economic news involving large numbers.
Okay, but my absolute favorite usage, and I use the word favorite loosely here because this is a little graphic, comes from the world of political comedy. Or maybe just political anger.
I have a feeling I know which one you're talking about. This is the curveball in the research.
It really is the curveball. So fast forward to 2009, totally different era. We are in the middle of the great financial crisis. The banks are failing. The housing market is crushed. Congress is intensely debating the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act.
The big stimulus bill.
Right.
A very tense time in Washington. Trillions of dollars on the line. Everyone is on edge.
Very tense. And enter U.S. Congressman Steve LaTourette, a Republican from Ohio. He's on the House floor. He is criticizing the bill, and he decides to invoke the ghost of Ross Perot.
But with a twist. A very biological
A
twist.
major twist. Again, we're impartially quoting the sources here. He says, quote, well, today there's another sucking sound going on in Washington, D.C., and that's the tightening of sinkers on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, as people are having to explain who put into the stimulus bill this provision of law.
That is certainly vivid imagery.
The tightening of sphincters. I mean, wow. He took a phrase about macroeconomic trade policy and turned it into a crude joke about terrified politicians.
It's crude, yes. But if we analyze it, and let's try to do this seriously for a second, it's actually a really interesting evolution of the language.
How so? Beyond just being a gross-out insult.
Well, look at the core emotion behind it. Perot's original usage was entirely about fear. The fear of the American worker losing their livelihood. Tourette flips it to describe the fear of the political class getting caught doing something unpopular.
So the sucking sound is still fundamentally the sound of fear.
Exactly. It's the sound of panic. Whether it's panic about factories closing or panic about a legislative scandal, the phrase captures that sudden contraction, that moment where you realize you have lost control.
It really de-elevates the discourse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Perot was trying to be a statesman warning of national doom. Tourette is making a bathroom joke on the House floor. But they are both tapping into that exact same visceral feeling of, uh-oh.
It proves that if an image is strong enough, it will stick around. Even if the original meaning gets a little distorted or corrupted along the way, it becomes a reliable container for our anxieties.
So let's bring this all together for you listening. We've gone from Perot's charts to the EU, to China, to the airline industry, and finally to the floor of Congress in 2009. What does a journey of the giant sucking sound actually tell us?
I think it tells us that economic anxiety is a permanent fixture in our lives. Ross Perot put a memorable name to a very specific fear, the fear that someone somewhere else is willing to do your job for less money.
And that fear definitely didn't end with NAFTA.
Not at all. As we saw with the Thomas Friedman example, that fear just moves around. It moved to Europe, it moved to China and India.
Oh.
And even today, we hear similar rhetoric. We hear about reshoring, about tariffs, about protecting domestic industries. The vocabulary changes, but the underlying fear of the sucking sound is identical.
It's like the sound is always there in the background noise of the global economy. It's the constant hum of globalization.
And it's a reminder that policies, like trade agreements, aren't just dry legal documents. They have visceral, emotional impacts on real people. Perot understood that. He completely bypassed the intellectual arguments, all the factor price equalization stuff we talked about, and he went straight for the gut. Or the ear, in this case.
He definitely knew how to make a headline. It's funny, even though he lost the election, that one phrase probably had more cultural impact than a lot of the actual policies discussed that entire year.
I would agree. It became a permanent part of the lexicon. It gave people language to express their insecurity about the future. And once you give people language for a feeling, they do not let go of it easily.
So here's a final provocative thought to leave you with. We track the sound from the U.S. to Mexico, and then from Mexico to China and India. But the world keeps spinning. Economies keep changing. Wages in China are rising now.
Right. The South is moving again, maybe to Vietnam, maybe to parts of Africa.
But there's another layer to this, isn't there? If that sucking sound represents the flow of opportunity to wherever it's cheapest or most efficient, where is the sound coming from today?
That is the big question. Is there always going to be a geographical South? Or, as automation and artificial intelligence enter the picture, maybe the sound isn't coming from another country at all anymore.
Wow.
Maybe the sound is coming from the server farm down the street.
That is a chilling thought. The giant sucking sound of the future might just be the hum of a cooling fan on an AI server.
It very well might be, and that is a fear that no border wall or trade tariff can really stop.
On that cheerful note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into 90s political history and global economics. We will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye, everyone.